The house on Clement Street smelled like pine cleaner and something medicinal that Sarah Chen, no relation to the attorney she always clarified, had long associated with rooms where people were fighting quietly to stay alive. She had been a home care nurse for 14 years. She knew the smell the way a carpenter knows the difference between pine and oak just by standing in the room. She set her bag on the kitchen counter that first Tuesday in March and looked around. The kitchen was clean. Not clean the way people clean when company is coming. Clean the way people clean when they have nothing else to do with their hands. Every dish in its place. A coffee mug, half full and cold, sitting on the counter beside the sink. A newspaper folded to the crossword. 3 answers filled in. The pen resting across the top. She picked up the mug and poured the coffee out and started a fresh pot. Robert Hale was 62 years old. Stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and sitting in the armchair by the window when she walked into the living room. He was looking out at the street. Portland in early March is a gray city, gray sky, gray pavement. The trees still bare, and the light coming through the window made him look older than his chart suggested. He had been a high school history teacher for 27 years, retired early when the diagnosis came. He had the kind of face that had once been sharp and was now just still. He didn't look up when she came in. "Coffee's on," she said. "I heard it start," he said. "Thank you, Sarah." She checked his vitals. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Pulse steady. He winced once when she adjusted the blood pressure cuff and didn't mention it. His medication regimen was specific and non-negotiable. 3 prescriptions, timed across the day, one of which required refrigeration. Without the evening dose in particular, his oncologist had been direct deterioration would accelerate, not immediately, but quickly enough. Sarah had read the chart 3 times before her first visit. She had wanted to understand what she was walking into. What she had not expected was this a man who did not seem afraid. She had cared for patients who were angry, patients who were resigned, patients who wept without warning in the middle of conversations about nothing important. Robert Hale was none of these. He was calm in a way that was different from acceptance. Acceptance had a softness to it. This was something else. This was the stillness of a man who had made a decision and was waiting for it to play out. After 3 visits, she asked him directly. She was checking the refrigerated medication counting doses, noting the dates, and she said, without looking up, "Most people in your situation are scared. You're not. I've been trying to figure out why." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on Clement Street. "My son is coming this weekend," he said. She looked up. "That's good." "Yes," he said. He turned back to the window. "It is." She didn't push further, but she thought about it on the drive home, and she thought about it again on Thursday. And by Saturday morning when she arrived and saw the unfamiliar Volvo parked in the driveway, silver new, Oregon plates, she understood that whatever she had been sensing in Robert Hale's stillness, it was about to become visible. Marcus Hale was 38, broad-shouldered, with his father's jawline and none of his father's stillness. He moved through the house the way people move through spaces they are already calculating quickly, with purpose, touching things lightly as if measuring them. He hugged his father when Sarah came in. A firm hug, both arms, the kind that looks like love and might be. His wife Diane was smaller, dark-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than Sarah's car payment. She smiled at Sarah and said, "You must be the nurse. We're so grateful you're here." She said it to Sarah, but her eyes moved, just briefly, to the bookshelves, then to the cabinet beside the television, then to the framed print above the mantel, a reproduction of an Oregon coast painting that Robert had mentioned his late mother had loved. Sarah said, "Of course," and went to check Robert's midday medication. In the kitchen, she could hear them in the living room. Marcus's voice, warm and practiced. "Dad, you look good. You look really good." Robert's voice, quieter. "I'm managing." Diane saying something Sarah couldn't make out, and then the sound of her heels on the hardwood as she moved slowly, unhurried toward the hallway. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter and listened to those heels stop outside the door to what she knew was Robert's home office. They stopped for perhaps 4 seconds, then moved on. When she brought Robert his medication with a glass of water, Marcus was sitting on the couch across from his father, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He was explaining the trip: Europe, France, Italy, a week in Portugal, 74 days. The whole family, Marcus, Diane, their 2 children, ages 7 and 9. A dream trip, he said, something they'd been planning for 2 years. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed smoothly, without hesitation, with all the right pauses in the right places. "We've been saving for this," Marcus said. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Dad, you understand." Robert said, "Of course I do. You'll be fine here. You've got Sarah. You've got Dr. Okafor." He glanced at Sarah and gave her a smile that was genuinely warm, or genuinely appeared to be. "We'll call every few days." "Every few days is fine," Robert said. Sarah set the glass on the side table and met Robert's eyes for 1 second. She couldn't read what was in them. She went back to the kitchen. She was washing the coffee mugs when Robert appeared in the doorway. He moved slowly. The lymphoma was in his chest, and he felt it when he walked, but he stood straight. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. She turned off the faucet. "You're worried," he said. "I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to." He leaned against the doorframe. "I've been teaching teenagers for 27 years. I know what people look like when they're not saying what they're thinking." She dried her hands on the dish towel. 74 days is a long time. "It is." "Without someone here who knows your medication schedule." "Sarah." His voice was even, not dismissive. "The way a person sounds when they have already had the conversation you are trying to start. I called my attorney 3 weeks ago." She looked at him. "I'm sorry." "My attorney, Patricia Chen. I called her 3 weeks before Marcus told me about the trip." He paused. I knew he was going to tell me about the trip. She didn't know what to say to that. Through the kitchen doorway, she could hear Diane's voice, light and pleasant, asking Marcus something about dinner reservations. "I know my son," Robert said. He said it without bitterness, without heat. He said it the way you state a fact you have verified many times over many years and have stopped needing to explain. Then he pushed off the doorframe and walked back toward the living room, slowly and straight, and left her standing in the clean kitchen with the dish towel still in her hands. She stood there for a long moment. The coffee maker clicked and went quiet. Outside, a bird landed on the railing of the back porch and then was gone. She thought, "I know my son." She thought, what does a man who knows his son prepare for 3 weeks before his son has said a word? She didn't have an answer, but she filed the question away, the way she filed everything she noticed in this house carefully, in order, in a place she would be able to find it again. The week before Marcus left, he became very interested in paperwork. It started on a Tuesday evening, 4 days before the flight to Paris. Robert was in the armchair by the window, the one with the worn patch on the left armrest where he'd rested his elbow for 23 years of reading, and Marcus sat across from him on the couch with a yellow legal pad and a pen he kept clicking. Sarah was in the kitchen, close enough to hear everything. "Dad," Marcus said, "I've been thinking, while we're gone, someone should have access to the accounts, just in case." Robert looked up from the book in his lap. He didn't answer immediately. Through the kitchen doorway, Sarah watched him set one finger on the page to hold his place. "Which accounts?" Robert said. "The checking, the savings." Marcus paused. "The investment account Patricia set up for you. I don't even know the full picture, honestly. It would help me feel better knowing I could step in if something happened." Robert closed the book. "I'll have Patricia send you a summary. Or you could just walk me through it now. Simpler." "Patricia will send a summary," Robert said again, and opened his book. Marcus smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind a man practices until it stops looking practiced. He wrote something on the yellow pad. Sarah didn't move. She kept her hands on the counter and watched the two of them the way she watched vitals on a monitor, looking for the number that didn't belong. 2 days later, Marcus took the credit card. She saw it happen. She was coming down the hallway with Robert's afternoon medications when Marcus came out of Robert's bedroom. He was tucking something into his shirt pocket. He didn't see her at first, and in the half-second before he registered her presence, his face was perfectly neutral, not guilty, not careful, simply blank in the way faces go when a person believes they are unobserved. Then he saw her, and the smile returned. "Just grabbing something for Dad," he said. "He asked me to hold on to it. Easier that way." Sarah said, "Of course." She went into the bedroom and set the medications on the nightstand. Robert was sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked at the nightstand, then at her. She kept her voice even. "Marcus said you asked him to hold your card." "I did," Robert said. He didn't elaborate. He picked up the glass of water and took his afternoon pills, one at a time, the way he always did. She noticed his hand was steadier than it had been last week. She filed that too. The morning of the departure, Robert was not well. She arrived at 6:15 to find him still in bed, which was unusual. He was normally dressed before she arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper. That morning, he was lying on his side with the blanket pulled up, and when she came in, he turned his head and said, "I need the pain medication. Sarah, the strong one." She went to the cabinet where the medications were stored. The prescription bottle for the oxycodone, the one his oncologist had prescribed for breakthrough pain, the one she had counted and logged every Tuesday, was not where it should have been. She checked the shelf twice. She checked the drawer below. She went to the kitchen and checked the cabinet there. Marcus was in the living room, loading a carry-on bag. Diane was somewhere upstairs. The children were running. Sarah came back to the bedroom doorway. "Robert, the oxycodone isn't in the cabinet." He nodded slowly, as if this were information he had already received. "Ask Marcus." She found Marcus zipping the carry-on. She said, "Robert needs his breakthrough medication. I can't locate it." Marcus looked up. His expression shifted into something that resembled concern. "Oh yeah, I actually talked to his doctor about that. Doctor, Ellison said he's been taking it too frequently, that it's better to step down for a while. I moved it somewhere safer, so there's no temptation." Sarah stood very still. She had spoken with Dr. Ellison herself 2 weeks ago at the clinic on Morrison Street. Dr. Ellison had said the opposite, that Robert's pain management was underdosed for his current staging, and that she should encourage him to use the breakthrough prescription when needed, not ration it. She had the appointment notes in her bag. She said, "I see." She went back to the bedroom. Robert was watching the door. She said quietly, "He says Dr. Ellison recommended stepping down." Robert said, "Dr. Ellison did not say that." "No," Sarah said, "she didn't." The room was quiet. Somewhere above them, a suitcase rolled across the floor. Robert looked at her steadily. He said, "Write down today's date, September 15th. Write down what Marcus said, word for word, and write down what you know, Doctor. Ellison actually said, sign it and date it." He paused. "I'll need it later." She looked at him. She thought of the yellow legal pad, the credit card, the medication now locked somewhere in this house. She thought of the question she had filed away in the clean kitchen. What does a man who knows his son prepare for the thaw? And she understood, standing there, that Robert had known the answer long before she had thought to ask. She said, "I'll write it down." 20 minutes before the taxi arrived, Marcus brought the luggage to the front porch. Carol Briggs from next door, 22 years on Clement Street, the woman who had called Robert every winter when the ice was bad on the front steps, was deadheading her roses along the fence line. She looked up when Marcus came out with the second bag. Marcus saw her and smiled. "Mrs. Briggs, good morning." "Morning, Marcus." She set down her shears. "Your father doing all right?" Marcus set the bag down and straightened. "He's managing," he said. Honestly, at this point, he paused, and his voice shifted into something that sounded like reluctant candor, the voice of a son who hated to say hard truths. At this point, he doesn't really need anyone worrying too much about the day-to-day. The doctors have been pretty clear about where things are headed. Best thing for him is just to be comfortable, not have people fussing." Carol Briggs looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the front door, then back at Marcus. She said, "I see," in the tone of a woman who had raised 3 children and knew exactly what she was hearing. Sarah was standing just inside the screen door. She had come to get Robert's morning pills from the kitchen. She stood very still. Marcus picked up his bag. "You have a good fall, Mrs. Briggs." Carol said nothing. She watched him carry the bag to the taxi. When he was out of earshot, she looked directly at the screen door, directly at Sarah, though she couldn't have known Sarah was there, and her expression was the particular expression of a neighbor who has just decided to pay attention. She said quietly, "He says Dr. Ellison recommended stepping down." Robert said, "Dr. Ellison did not say that." "No," Sarah said. "She didn't." The room was quiet. Somewhere above them, a suitcase rolled across the floor. Robert looked at her steadily. He said, "Write down today's date, September 15th. Write down what Marcus said, word for word, and write down what you know, Doctor. Ellison actually said, sign it and date it." He paused. "I'll need it later." She looked at him. She thought of the yellow legal pad, the credit card, the medication now locked somewhere in this house. She thought of the question she had filed away in the clean kitchen. What does a man who knows his son prepare for Gree? And she understood, standing there, that Robert had known the answer long before she had thought to ask. She said, "I'll write it down." 40 minutes later, Marcus came to the bedroom doorway with his coat on. He crossed the room and bent down and kissed Robert on the forehead. "I'll call from Paris," he said. "Don't worry about anything." Robert reached up and patted his son's arm. "Have a good trip," he said. "Enjoy every day." Marcus squeezed his shoulder once, picked up his bag from the floor, and left. The front door opened and closed. A car started in the driveway. Then the sound faded, and the house went quiet. Sarah was still standing near the window. Robert lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he turned his head toward her. His voice was calm, the same voice he used when he talked about his students, or the weather, or what he wanted for breakfast. He said, "Now the game begins." The call came on the 3rd morning. I'd been awake since 5, the way I usually was those days. The medication, what remained of it, sat in the orange prescription bottle on the nightstand, and I had counted what was left the night before. 11 pills. At my current dosage, that was 11 days. Not enough to bridge 74. Sarah arrived at 7, the way she always did. She set her bag by the door, checked the IV line, wrote something in her notebook. She had a system, and I had come to find it comforting, not because I needed comfort, but because systems meant someone was paying attention. She was making coffee in the kitchen when the tablet on the nightstand lit up. The call was from Paris. The timestamp read 7:14 a.m. Portland time, which meant late afternoon there. I let it ring twice. Then I reached over and pressed the button on the small device beside the orange bottle, the one that looked like a portable speaker, the kind you might use to listen to the radio. Then I answered. Marcus's face filled the screen. He was in what looked like a hotel lobby, or a bar marble behind him, soft lighting, the kind of place that costs more per night than I used to make in a week of teaching. He was smiling. Diane stood just behind his left shoulder. I could see the edge of her face, her hair, the pale gleam of a wine glass in her hand. She was not looking at the screen. She was looking slightly to the left of it at the wall, or at nothing, with the particular expression of a person who has decided not to look at the thing directly in front of them. Sarah told me later that she had noticed the same thing during the visit in March, when Diane had stood in the living room doorway. While Marcus explained the trip, Diane had kept her eyes on her own hands, folding and unfolding the strap of her bag. And once, just once, she had looked at Robert with an expression that was not calculation, but something closer to apology. Then Marcus had said her name, and the expression had disappeared, replaced immediately by the smooth, pleasant face she wore the way some people wear good jewelry carefully and always in public. "Dad," he said, "how are you feeling?" "Better today," I said. "The morning was easier." He nodded, still smiling. "That's good. Listen, Dad, I have to tell you something. I found something in my luggage when we landed." He paused, tilting his head slightly, the way he used to as a boy when he was about to tell me he'd broken something. "I found a bag, your medication bag. I think it must have gotten mixed in with my things when we were packing." I said nothing. I waited. "I didn't realize until we were already through customs," he said, "and I couldn't exactly bring it back." He shrugged a small, practiced shrug. "I threw it in the trash at the airport, the bin right by the gate." He said it the way you'd say you'd forgotten to water a plant. "I'm sorry, Dad. It was an accident." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Why did you throw them away?" The smile stayed. It was the smile of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and was pleased with how it was going. "Well, Dad," he said, and his voice shifted, not dramatically, just slightly, the way temperature shifts before a storm. "I've been thinking, you're stage 3. The doctors have been honest with us. The medication manages symptoms, but it's not going to change the outcome." He paused. "You're going to die. Dad, maybe not next month, but you're going to die. And I thought, why put you through more of it? Why keep taking the pills and feeling sick from them when it doesn't actually help?" From the kitchen, I heard Sarah stop moving. The sound of the coffee maker continued, but her footsteps had gone quiet. "I'll take care of the company while you're gone," Marcus said. "I've already started talking to some of the board members. Diane has a plan for the transition. She's very organized. You know how she is."
There was a sound from behind him, a soft laugh, barely audible, from Diane's direction. "We'll make sure everything is handled properly. You don't need to worry about any of it."
I said, "Marcus." "Yes, Dad." "What plan does Diane have?" Another small pause. The smile flickered, not disappeared, just adjusted. "Just the business," he said. "The restructuring we talked about, the property holdings, all of it. She's very good at this kind of thing." I looked at him on the screen, marble behind him, a wine glass catching light. My son, 38 years old, standing in a hotel lobby in Paris, explaining to me why he had thrown away my medication. "I see," I said. "I'll call you again when I can," he said. "We have a dinner reservation at 8. But I wanted to let you know about the medication so you weren't confused. Maybe ask Sarah to contact the doctor about getting a new supply. Though, honestly, Dad, I'd think about whether you really need it." He reached toward the screen. "Take care of yourself." "I will," I said. "Enjoy Paris." The screen went dark. I did not move immediately. I looked at the ceiling, the same water stain in the upper left corner I'd been looking at for 3 weeks. I counted 4 seconds. Then I reached over and pressed the button on the small device again. A single green light blinked twice and went off. Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was holding her coffee mug with both hands. Her face was the color of someone who had just heard something they could not unhear. She said, "Robert." "I know," I said. "He threw away your medication." She said it slowly, as if she were testing the words to see if they were real. "He said you don't need it anymore. He said," she stopped. She set the mug down on the dresser. "He said you're going to die anyway." "He did say that." "And the company, and the property." She looked at me. "Robert, that was a threat. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't an accident. None of it was an accident. The medication, the timing." "No," I said, "it wasn't." She crossed to the chair beside the bed and sat down. Her hands were in her lap. "We have to call the police. Right now. He cut off your medication. He talked about your property. He locked you out of, what did he say? The credit card. The phone contract. Did he actually?" I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the secondary one, the one Marcus didn't know about, and tried the number for my bank. The line connected. I entered my card number. The automated voice told me the account had been frozen pending a security review. I set the phone down. "The card is frozen," I said. Sarah stared at me. "And why aren't you Robert? Why are you so calm right now?" I looked at her. She was a good person. She had driven 40 minutes each way for 3 weeks to take care of a man she hadn't known before October, and she had done it without complaint, without drama, with the particular quiet competence of someone who understood that care was a form of attention. She deserved a real answer. Because calling the police right now would give Marcus exactly what he wants. I said, he would say the medication was an accident. He would say the card was a security error. He would say he was worried about me and made some poor decisions from a distance. I paused, and he would be back in this house within a week, with a lawyer, and I would be the confused old man who overreacted. Sarah was quiet. "What I have on that device," I said, "is his voice, his exact words, his mention of Diane's plan, his mention of the property and the company, his statement that I'm going to die anyway." I looked at her steadily. That's evidence of intent, but it's not enough on its own. Patricia needs the financial records. She needs the property documents. She needs to show a pattern, not just one phone call from a hotel bar. "Patricia," Sarah said, "your lawyer." "Yes." "You already called her." "I called her 6 weeks ago," I said, "before Marcus booked the flights." Sarah looked at the small device on the nightstand. Then she looked at me. Something was moving behind her eyes. Not anger, exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular emotion of someone who had thought they understood a situation and had just learned they were only seeing part of it. "You knew," she said. "You knew he was going to do something like this." "I didn't know exactly what," I said. "I knew the direction." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on the street. The coffee maker in the kitchen made a final sound and went silent. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need you to keep coming," I said. "I need you to keep your notes every visit, every observation, everything you've seen since October. Date, time, what you observed. Your records as a medical professional carry weight." I reached over and picked up the orange prescription bottle, 11 pills. "And I need you to help me contact my doctor today about an emergency supply. Marcus was right that I'm going to die. He was wrong about the timeline." Sarah stood up. She picked up her coffee mug. She stood at the window for a moment, looking at the street, and I could see the effort it was taking her to settle herself, to put what she had just heard into some workable order. Then she turned around. "I'll call Dr. Okafor's office when they open at 8:30, she said. Her voice was level again, nurse's voice. "And I'll start writing up my notes from the beginning. Everything I remember." "Thank you," I said. She nodded once. Then she said, very quietly. He laughed. Robert, Diane laughed. "I know," I said. "It's on the recording." The house went quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Not the quiet of an empty afternoon, the quiet of something switched off. Marcus had been gone less than 6 hours when I noticed the landline. I picked up the receiver and heard nothing. Not a dial tone, not static, nothing. I set it back in the cradle and sat with that for a moment. I had known this was coming. I want to be precise about that. I had known. In the way you know a storm is approaching when you've watched weather long enough, Marcus was methodical in the way that people who have never been truly tested believe they are methodical. He had a checklist somewhere. I was certain of it. The landline was probably item 3 or 4, after the credit cards and before the utilities. I went to the kitchen and turned on the faucet. Cold water ran for about 40 seconds, then slowed, then stopped entirely. I turned the handle the other direction. Nothing. I stood at the sink for a moment and looked at my hands under the dry faucet. They were thinner than they had been in September. I noticed that without particular feeling and went back to the bedroom. The phone was still under the mattress. In the envelope I had taped to the box spring 14 months ago, a prepaid flip phone, the kind you buy at a drugstore with cash. I had put $40 of minutes on it the same week I first called Patricia. I hadn't touched it since. I checked the battery 63% and put it back. I wasn't ready to use it yet. Patricia had told me to wait until there was something worth documenting. I had the recording. I had Sarah's notes, which she had started that same morning in a small green notebook she kept in her bag. What I didn't have yet was a neutral third party who had seen the conditions of the house with their own eyes and had written it down somewhere official. I needed that. Patricia had been specific about it. So I waited. On the second day, I found the flashlight in the hall closet and put it on the nightstand. The electricity was still on, but I wanted to know where the flashlight was. On the third day, the electricity went out. Not gradually, all at once, the way a switch works. It was 11 in the morning. I was sitting in the chair by the window reading, and the lamp beside me went dark. I finished the paragraph I was on, then closed the book. I drank water from the bottles I had in the pantry. I ate what didn't need to be heated. The temperature in the house dropped slowly, the way it does in Portland in November when there's no heat running not dangerously fast, but steadily, like a tide going out. I slept in 2 sweaters and the wool socks my daughter-in-law had given me 2 Christmases ago, which I thought about briefly and then stopped thinking about. The pain was manageable for the first 4 days. On the 5th day, it wasn't. I know what it feels like when the medication is working and when it isn't. There's a particular quality to the pain. When the chemistry is wrong, it doesn't spike. It accumulates, like pressure building behind a wall. By the morning of the 5th day, I was moving carefully, the way you move when you know that any sudden shift will cost you. I sat in the chair. I didn't try to walk to the kitchen unless I had to. I counted things. The books on the shelf across from me, 47. The ceiling tiles in the hallway, which I could see through the open door, 14. Sarah arrived at 9:15. I heard her key in the lock. She had a copy, which Marcus had apparently forgotten about or decided didn't matter. She pushed the door open and stopped. I watched her take in the room, the cold, the dark, the flashlight on the nightstand, me, in the chair, in 2 sweaters, with a blanket across my lap that I had pulled from the closet on day 3. She said, "Robert," just that, the way my daughter had said Dad on the phone the night before she left for her semester abroad, 20 years ago. Not a question, not an accusation, just recognition of something that required a response she hadn't yet found. "Good morning," I said. She set her bag down and crossed to the thermostat. She looked at it, then looked at the light switch. She tried it twice. Then she took out her phone and called 911. She told them she was a home health nurse at a residential address, that her patient was a 64-year-old man with stage 3 cancer, that the utilities had been disconnected and the house was without heat or running water, and that she needed someone to come and document the conditions. While she was on the phone, she opened her green notebook and started writing. Date, time, temperature estimate, observable conditions. She didn't look at me while she wrote. She was thorough in the way that people are thorough when they are angry and have decided that thoroughness is the only useful expression of that anger. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I recognized one of them, Officer Delgado, a younger man who had come to the school twice in my last year of teaching, for a career day, and then for a lockdown drill. He didn't recognize me. That was fine. They walked through the house. They looked at the fuse box, which was intact. They looked at the water main, which had been shut off at the valve outside the exterior valve that requires a tool to access, that a homeowner with stage 3 cancer and no car and no working phone could not have reached on his own. They looked at the empty pill organizer on the nightstand. Officer Delgado asked me what had happened. I told him I thought I had forgotten to pay the utility bills. I said it plainly, without elaboration, and watched him write it down. Sarah said, "He has stage 3 cancer. He cannot drive. He has not left this house in 3 weeks. He does not forget to pay his utility bills." Her voice was the same level voice she used when she was telling me something I needed to understand clearly. She said, "The exterior water shutoff requires a tool. I'd like that noted." Officer Delgado looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he wrote something in his notebook. His partner took photographs of the fuse box, the water valve, the pill organizer, the interior temperature reading on a small thermometer Sarah produced from her bag. After they left, Sarah sat down across from me. She had her notebook open on her knee. I said, "Write down the officers' names, badge numbers if you got them, the time they arrived and left, everything they photographed." She was already writing. Without looking up, she said, "Who is Patricia?" "My attorney," I said. "She's been building the case for 4 months. She needs a third-party record, someone outside the family who saw the conditions and reported them officially." Sarah looked up then. "That's why you told them you forgot the bills." If I had accused Marcus directly, they would have needed to investigate, contacted him, given him time to produce explanations. This way, they came, they saw, they documented, and they left. The record exists. Marcus doesn't know it exists. Sarah closed the notebook. She held it in both hands for a moment, looking at the cover. Then she said, "The recording, my notes, the police report, is that enough?" "It will be," I said. I reached under the mattress and took out the flip phone. I dialed Patricia's number from memory. I had memorized it the same week I bought the phone, because I had known there might come a time when I couldn't look it up. She answered on the second ring. I told her that the police had come and documented the conditions. I told her the date, the time, the officers' names as Sarah read them to me from her notebook. I told her the recording was secure. Patricia said, "Are you all right?" "I need medication," I said, "and heat, and water, in that order." "I'll have an emergency motion filed by end of day," she said. "Robert, we have enough. We have more than enough." I said, "I know." I folded the phone and put it in my shirt pocket. Sarah was watching me. She had the green notebook pressed against her chest, both arms folded across it, and she looked like someone who had just understood something that changed the shape of everything she had seen over the past several weeks. She said, "You knew he would do this." I didn't answer right away. Outside the window, a car passed on the street. The light through the glass was thin and gray, the particular gray of Portland in November, which I had watched from classroom windows for 31 years. "I know my son," I said. "The emergency protective order came through at 4:47 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because Sarah wrote it in the green notebook she had started keeping notes sometime in the 3rd week, quietly, without my asking. I didn't know about the notebook until she showed it to me later. She had written down dates, times, what she observed, what she heard. 31 pages of a school nurse's careful handwriting, the kind of documentation that comes from someone who has spent years writing incident reports and knowing that details matter after the fact. Patricia called to tell me the order had been granted. She said a Portland police officer would be at the house within the hour to execute the restoration of utilities and access. She said it in the same tone she used for everything measured, precise, the way a person speaks when they have learned that urgency and calm are not opposites but partners. The officer who arrived was named Garrett. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with the particular patience of someone who had seen enough domestic situations to understand that the worst ones rarely look the way you expect them to. He walked through the house with a flashlight before the power came back on. He documented everything the main breaker switched off at the panel. The water shutoff valve turned at the street. The deadbolt replaced a new lock. A Schlage model that had not been there when I moved into this house in 1991. He photographed each item. He was thorough. I sat in the kitchen and watched him work and thought about how Marcus had been thorough too. In his own way, he had thought of everything except the one thing that mattered. When the lights came back on, Sarah made coffee. She moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who had been coming here every day for weeks, which she had. She knew where the mugs were. She knew I took mine without sugar. She set it in front of me and sat across the table and said nothing, which was exactly right. Officer Garrett left at 6:15. Before he went, he gave me a copy of his report. He said, "Sir, this documentation has been submitted to the DA's office as well. You should know that." I told him I appreciated that. He nodded once and walked to his car. I watched him go. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Patricia had moved quickly. She had a gift for moving quickly without appearing to rush. She filed the emergency order, coordinated with the district attorney's office, and arranged for the case to be assigned to Judge Harold Westbrook's courtroom. She told me later that she had specifically requested Westbrook. She said he had a reputation for reading documents carefully before anyone said a word. I understood why that mattered. Marcus flew back from Paris on Wednesday. I knew this because Patricia's assistant had been tracking his travel, a simple thing, nothing dramatic, just a matter of knowing which flight he was on. He landed at PDX at 11:40 in the morning and went directly to a hotel downtown. He did not come to the house. He did not call. He had not called in 74 days, and he did not call on the 75th either. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The heat was on. The water ran when I turned the tap. I took my medication at 8 o'clock in the evening, the correct dose, the one Dr. Alvarez had prescribed, and I sat in the chair by the window and watched the street. The oak tree in the front yard had lost most of its leaves by then. I had planted that tree in 1994, the year Marcus turned 10. He had helped me dig the hole. He had been proud of it for about a week, the way children are proud of things they help make, and then he forgot about it entirely. The tree kept growing anyway. Patricia had told me to arrive at the courthouse at 8:30. Sarah drove me. She had offered without being asked, and I had accepted without argument, which was itself a kind of change. I had spent most of my adult life not accepting help easily. We didn't talk much on the drive. Portland in November has a particular quality of silence, the wet quiet of a city that has accepted the rain as a permanent condition rather than a disruption. I watched the buildings go by and thought about the classroom I had left when I retired the rows of desks, the particular smell of chalk dust and old textbooks, the way 31 years of the same room eventually makes the room feel like an extension of yourself. The courtroom was smaller than people imagine when they haven't been inside one. Wood paneling, fluorescent light, the American flag in the corner, the seal of the state of Oregon on the wall behind the bench. Patricia was already at the plaintiff's table when we arrived. She had 2 folders open in front of her and a yellow legal pad covered in her handwriting. She looked up when I came in, gave me a brief nod, and returned to her notes. Marcus and Diane arrived at 8:52. I know because I was watching the door. He was wearing a charcoal suit I had never seen before, new, European cut, the kind of jacket that fits too precisely to have been bought off a rack. Diane wore a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings and the particular expression of a woman who has been coached on how to appear sympathetic without admitting anything. They walked in together. Marcus was talking quietly to his own attorney, a man named Feldman who had a reputation in Portland for family litigation. Marcus's posture was confident. He had the walk of a man who believed he was about to manage a situation. Then he saw me. He stopped for just a moment, not long. Not long enough that anyone else would have noticed, but I noticed, because I had been watching him walk into rooms his entire life. I had watched him walk into kindergarten, into high school, into his first job interview. I knew his walk the way you know the handwriting of someone you have read for decades. He stopped for a fraction of a second, and then he continued to his seat, and he did not look at me again. Sarah sat in the gallery, 3rd row, directly behind me. She had the green notebook in her lap. Judge Harold Westbrook entered at 9 o'clock. He was 63, gray-haired, with reading glasses on a chain around his neck. He had been on the bench for 22 years. He sat down, arranged his papers, put on his glasses, and read for approximately 90 seconds before he acknowledged the room. That 90 seconds told me everything Patricia had said about him was accurate. He said, "We're here on the matter of protective orders and alleged elder abuse, criminal endangerment, and financial fraud. Counsel, you may proceed." Patricia stood. She did not look at Marcus. She addressed the judge directly, and she spoke for 7 minutes without notes. She laid out the timeline, the diagnosis, the trip, the medications, the utilities, the lock, the phone. She named the dates. She named the amounts. She named the specific drugs that had been withheld and the clinical significance of withholding them during active chemotherapy treatment. She spoke the way someone speaks when they have prepared for a very long time and are finally in the room where the preparation becomes visible. Then she said, "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit 7, which is an audio-visual recording made by my client on the night of October 9th. Feldman objected on foundation grounds. Judge Westbrook looked at him over his glasses and said, "Overruled. Let's hear it." The recording played through the courtroom speakers. It was the video call Marcus's face on the screen, the kitchen behind him in whatever hotel room or apartment he had been staying in, and his voice, which was very clear because Robert had held the phone steady and the room had been quiet. The courtroom heard Marcus say, "I threw the medication in the trash. Those pills cost $400 a month, and you're not going to be around to need them much longer anyway." The courtroom heard him say, "I've already had the locks changed. The utilities are handled. You don't need to worry about any of that." The courtroom heard him say, "When this is over, the company transfers automatically. I've already spoken to the accountant." Judge Westbrook did not move during the recording. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes on the speaker, and his expression did not change, which was somehow more significant than if it had. When the recording ended, the room was quiet for a long moment. In the third row of the gallery, a man I had not noticed before leaned forward and put both hands flat on the bench in front of him. He was perhaps 50, gray at the temples, wearing a jacket that had the particular rumpled quality of something worn to work every day for years. I did not recognize him immediately. Then I did Dennis Farrow, who had been the assistant principal at Jefferson High during my last 4 years of teaching. He had attended a retirement dinner for me in June of the year I left. He had given a short speech. Marcus had been in the room for that speech. Dennis Farrow was looking at Marcus now, not with anger, with something quieter than that, the expression of a man who has just heard something he cannot unhear and is recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Marcus had applied for a position on the Jefferson High School board 18 months ago. Dennis had been one of his references. I knew this because Marcus had mentioned it at Christmas, casually, the way he mentioned things he considered accomplished. Dennis did not look away from Marcus for a long time. I did not look at Marcus. I looked at the Oregon State seal on the wall behind the judge's head. I had looked at that seal before, years ago, in a different kind of proceeding, and I had learned that looking at a fixed point helps you stay still when everything around you is moving. Patricia continued. She submitted the financial documentation, the amended beneficiary designations on 3 accounts, the draft power of attorney that had been prepared but not yet executed, the correspondence between Marcus and a Portland real estate attorney regarding the property on Laurelhurst Drive, my house, the one I had bought with Marcus's mother in 1989, the one I had lived in alone for 11 years since the divorce. The correspondence was dated 6 weeks before Marcus left for Europe. He had been planning this before he booked the flights. She said, "Your Honor, the defendant did not act impulsively. He acted with deliberation. He arranged the financial instruments, he planned the utilities, he replaced the locks, and he removed the medications, all before departing the country for 74 days. My client is a 64-year-old man with stage 3 cancer who was left without heat, water, medication, or means of communication. This is not neglect. This meets the statutory definition of criminal endangerment, and the recording establishes intent to benefit financially from his father's death." Feldman stood and said his client had acted out of concern for his father's financial affairs, and that the recording had been taken out of context. He said Marcus had been under significant stress. He said the utilities had been a misunderstanding. Judge Westbrook looked at him. He said, "Counselor, your client said on a recorded video call that he threw his father's chemotherapy medication in the trash. What context would make that a misunderstanding?" Feldman did not have an answer for that. The judge looked at Marcus then directly, for the first time since the proceedings had begun. Marcus had gone very still. The confidence that had been in his posture when he walked in was gone. Not all at once, but the way heat leaves a room when a window is opened. Diane had her hands in her lap and was looking at the table. Judge Westbrook said, "Mr. Calloway, I have been on this bench for 22 years. I have heard a great many explanations for a great many things. What I have just heard, in your own words, on a recording you apparently did not know existed, is not something I am able to characterize as a family misunderstanding." He paused. "This court is issuing a permanent protective order effective immediately. This matter is being referred to the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office for criminal review on charges including criminal mistreatment in the first degree and financial elder abuse. Your assets are frozen pending investigation. You are ordered to have no contact with the plaintiff." Marcus said, "Your Honor." The judge said, "You will have the opportunity to speak through counsel. Mr. Calloway." "Not now." I had not moved. I had not changed expression. I had my hands folded on the table in front of me, the way I used to sit at parent-teacher conferences, on the other side of the desk, the composed side, the side that had seen enough to know that composure is not the absence of feeling, but the decision to let feeling serve a purpose rather than run loose. Patricia leaned toward me and said quietly, "That's the referral. That's what we needed." I nodded once. Behind me, I heard Sarah exhale. It was a small sound, barely audible, the sound of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Marcus and Diane left the courtroom through the side door. I watched them go. Marcus did not look back. Diane looked back once, briefly, and what was on her face was not anger. It was something more complicated than that. Something I recognized as the expression of a person who has just understood the full weight of what they chose. I had seen that expression before, on the faces of students who had made a decision they couldn't undo. It never looked the way people expected it to look. It never looked like defiance. It looked like arithmetic, the slow, unwilling addition of consequences. Patricia gathered her folders. She said, "The DA's office will move on this within 30 days. I'll keep you informed at every step." I said, "Thank you, Patricia." She said, "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's finished." She clicked her briefcase shut and walked out, and I sat for a moment in the quiet of the emptying courtroom, with the fluorescent light overhead and the rain beginning again outside the high windows. Sarah appeared at my shoulder. She said, "Ready?" I said, "Yes." We walked out together through the main doors, into the gray November morning. The oak tree on Laurelhurst Drive was still standing. I knew, with or without its leaves. It had been standing for 30 years. It did not require anyone to remember planting it in order to keep growing. The verdict came down on a Thursday. Patricia called me at 7:14 in the morning, before I had finished my first cup of coffee. She didn't say good morning. She said, "It's done." Judge Westbrook had ruled the previous afternoon, after 2 hours of deliberation that Patricia later described as unusually short. Marcus was ordered to return full title to the house on Gleason Street, the joint savings account he had transferred in September, and the investment portfolio he had quietly moved into Diane's name 3 weeks before they left for Europe. The amended will the one I had signed in Patricia's office on a Wednesday morning in August, while Marcus was somewhere over the Atlantic, was reinstated in full. The unauthorized power of attorney Marcus had filed in October was voided. Every document he had touched in my name, without my knowledge, was declared invalid. The criminal charges were separate. Patricia told me those would take longer, but the preliminary finding was sufficient. Attempted murder. Diane was listed as a co-conspirator. The recording Sarah had witnessed me make 41 minutes of Marcus explaining, in his own careful voice, exactly what he intended had been entered into evidence on the second day of the proceeding. Patricia said the prosecutor had played it twice. She said the room had been very quiet both times. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked at the window. The rain had stopped overnight. The light outside was the particular pale gray of early Portland mornings in November, the kind that looks cold but isn't quite. Patricia said, "You won, Robert, but I want to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly." She paused. "This victory is going to hurt. It already does. I think." I said, "I know, but it's justice." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, it is." Another pause. "I'll send the final documents by Friday. Your accounts will be accessible by end of next week. The house title transfer will take 30 days, but you can stay in the house without any legal challenge. No one can remove you." I thanked her. She said, "You already called me at the right time, Robert." A week later, and some of those accounts would have been unreachable. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't need to. I had called her in August before Marcus bought the plane tickets because I had already known what he was going to do. Not suspected. Known. I had taught high school history for 22 years, and before that, I had spent 6 years doing investigative work, reading people for a living. Marcus was my son. I had watched him grow from a boy who couldn't lie about a broken window into a man who could lie about almost anything except to me, and only because I had been paying attention since the beginning. Sarah came that afternoon. She knocked twice before letting herself in, the way she always did, and she set a paper bag on the kitchen counter without announcing what was in it. She had brought soup. She always brought soup on days she thought might be hard. She sat across from me at the kitchen table for a while without saying much. She was still in her work clothes. She had come directly from a shift. There were lines of tiredness around her eyes that I had not noticed a month ago. She said, "Finally, do you regret it, letting it get that far, letting him do what he did?" I had been waiting for that question, not from her specifically, but from someone. I had been turning it over in my own mind for weeks, in the quiet hours between midnight and 4 in the morning when the medication wore thin and sleep stayed away. I said, "I don't regret the strategy. I had to let him act. The recording, the transfers, the missing medication, none of it would have been prosecutable if I had confronted him in September and he'd simply denied it." I stopped. "But I do regret that my son is the kind of man who needed a strategy. I taught him better than this. Or I thought I did." Sarah looked at me for a long moment. She said, "You're a brave father." I shook my head. "I'm not brave. I'm just a father who knew his son. I knew what Marcus would do before he did it. That's the only reason I was ready. I called my lawyer in August because I already understood what was coming. That's not courage. That's just paying attention for 38 years. She nodded slowly. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. 3 weeks after that conversation, a letter arrived in a plain envelope with a Eugene return address. The handwriting on the front was careful and slightly cramped, the handwriting of someone who had learned cursive properly and still used it. Inside was a single page, dated the previous Sunday. The writer's name was Priya Anand. She had been a student in my AP history class in 2009. She wrote that she had seen a brief mention of the case in the Oregon Public Broadcasting newsletter, not the details, just the name and a reference to the criminal proceedings, and had looked up the rest. She wrote that she remembered a lesson I had given in November of her junior year on the subject of civil disobedience and strategic patience. She wrote, "You told us that the most powerful thing a person can do when the system is being used against them is learn the system better than the person using it. I've thought about that a lot. I'm a public defender now. I think about it almost every day." She wished me well. She did not ask for a response. I read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Then I set it on top of the stack of Patricia's draft edits and went to the window. The birch tree was still bare. A sparrow was working at something in the upper branches with focused, unhurried attention. 31 years in a classroom. You teach, and most of it disappears into the ordinary current of other people's lives, and you accept that, because that is what teaching is. But occasionally something surfaces. Occasionally you find out that a word you said in November of someone's junior year is still in the room with them 20 years later, doing work you never knew it was doing. I went back to the table and wrote Priya Anand a short reply. I told her she was doing the right work. I told her to keep going. We sat for another few minutes, and then she stood, gathered her coat and bag, and said she needed to get home. She had an early shift the next morning, and her caseload was changing. She had told me 2 weeks ago that the agency was reassigning her to a different patient, someone on the east side of the city. This was, we both understood, her last visit in any official capacity. She was at the door when she turned back. She said, "What will you do now?" I said, "I'll live. I'll take my medication." I paused, and I'll wait to see what my son learns from all of this, whether he learns anything at all. She looked at me steadily. Then she said, "I hope he does." I said, "So do I." She left. The door closed quietly behind her. I heard her footsteps on the porch steps, then on the front walk, then nothing. I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. The soup was still warm. I picked up the spoon and ate it slowly. By myself, in the pale November light coming through the window above the sink, the same window I had looked out of for 11 years, through different seasons, in different conditions, always from the same chair. The medication was on the counter where it belonged. Patricia's final documents would arrive by Friday. The house was mine again, in every sense that the law could confirm. I finished the soup. I rinsed the bowl. Then I went to the counter, opened the prescription bottle, and took my pills with a full glass of water, the way the doctor had always told me to, the way I had not been able to for 74 days. Justice was served. It tasted like nothing in particular. It felt like something solid underfoot after a long time on uncertain ground. 6 months passed. I know that sounds like a transition in a book, the kind of sentence that skips over the hard part. But the hard part was exactly what those 6 months were made of. And I want to be honest about that. The oncologist, Dr. Farida Osei, had warned me in September that interrupting the medication regimen for that length of time would have consequences that might not be immediately visible. She was right. The first 3 months after Marcus left for Europe, and then the 3 months after he came back and the legal proceedings began, were the worst I had felt since the original diagnosis. There were mornings I could not get out of the chair by the window without holding the armrest with both hands. There were afternoons I fell asleep at the kitchen table with a book open in front of me and woke up an hour later not knowing what day it was. But by February, something had shifted. The scans showed what Dr. Osei called, with careful understatement, a stabilization of the primary mass. Not shrinking, not gone. Stabilized. I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She said it meant my body had stopped losing the argument. I thought that was a reasonable way to put it. I still lived in the house on Clement Street. The legal fees had reduced what I had saved considerably. Patricia Chen does not come cheaply, and I would not have wanted her to, but the house was mine. The accounts were mine, and the pension from 31 years of teaching at Jefferson High was still arriving on the 1st of every month, the same as it always had. I was not wealthy. I had never been wealthy. I was, however, solvent, and in the specific context of what Marcus and Diane had attempted, solvency felt like a profound thing. Sarah Okonkwo still came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She had been officially assigned to another patient in March, a retired postal worker named Gerald on the east side of Portland. But she kept showing up at my door with her bag and her sensible shoes and the particular expression she wore when she had something to say but was deciding whether to say it. I had learned to read that expression well. I usually let her decide on her own. One Thursday, in late February, she sat across from me at the kitchen table while I drank my coffee, and she drank the tea she had started bringing herself because she claimed my tea selection was an embarrassment. She had been quiet for a while, which was not unusual for Sarah, and then she said, "You know, I told my daughter about you." I set my cup down. About me specifically, or about the situation? Both, she said. She's 19. She's studying pre-law at Oregon State. Sarah wrapped both hands around her mug. She asked me why you didn't just cut Marcus off years ago, before any of this happened. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know it, that I'd ask you. I looked out the window. The birch tree in the front yard had started to show the first suggestion of bud small, tight, not yet committed to spring. I knew what Marcus was. I said, I knew it for a long time, probably since he was in his late 20s. You can know something about a person and still love them. The love doesn't stop because the knowledge arrives. Sarah was quiet. I didn't cut him off earlier because I kept believing that what I knew wasn't the whole story. I said, "That's what parents do. We tell ourselves we're being fair, we're being patient, we're giving them time to become different people." I picked up my cup again. Sometimes that's wisdom, sometimes it's just hope wearing a more dignified name. Sarah said, "And when did you know it wasn't going to change?" "When he took the medication." I said, "Not when he went to Europe. Not when he started moving the accounts. When he took the medication, I understood that he had decided I was already gone, that I was a problem to be resolved rather than a person to be considered." I drank the last of my coffee. It was still warm. After that, I stopped hoping and started documenting. Those are different activities. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "My daughter also asked why you still love him." I thought about that for a moment. Because I do. That's the honest answer. Love isn't something you turn off because the person has done a terrible thing. If it were, it wouldn't be worth much. I set the cup down. But love doesn't mean silence in the face of what's wrong. Those two things, love and accountability, are not the same thing. And pretending they are is how people get hurt, including the person you love. Sarah looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm going to tell her you said that." "Tell her to become a good lawyer," I said. "The world needs more of those." Marcus was serving an 8-year sentence at a correctional facility in Salem. The charges attempted murder and elder abuse had been argued over for 3 weeks before the jury returned a verdict that took 4 hours to reach. I had not attended the sentencing. Patricia had offered to accompany me, but I told her there was nothing I needed to see in that room. The outcome was sufficient. Diane had pled to a lesser charge and received a 3-year sentence. Her attorney had argued that she had been under Marcus's influence, that she had not fully understood the implications of what they were doing. The judge, Harold Westbrook, who I had come to respect considerably, had listened to that argument with the patience of a man who had heard it many times before and found it unpersuasive, but who was also bound by what the law permitted. 3 years was what the law permitted. I accepted that. In November, I received a letter from Marcus. It arrived in a plain envelope with the facility's return address in the upper left corner. I recognized his handwriting on the front, the same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards and school projects, and, once, on a note he left on the kitchen table when he was 16, saying he was sorry for something I no longer remembered. I opened it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, while Sarah was in the other room changing the linens. I read it twice. He wrote that he understood now. He wrote that he had spent months. He underlined months thinking about the moment in the courtroom when Patricia had laid out the timeline of my preparations, the recordings, the amended documents, the calls to Dr. Osei, the notes I had kept in the journal that had been entered into evidence. He wrote that he had sat in that courtroom and realized, for the first time, that I had known what he was planning before he had finished planning it, that I had not confronted him, had not argued, had not threatened, had simply prepared. He wrote that he had asked himself, for months, why I had done it that way, and that he had finally understood because I was not angry, because anger would have been easier to dismiss, because what I had felt was grief, and grief cannot be argued with. He wrote, "I know you were sad, not angry. I know that now. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry." Sarah came back into the kitchen while I was still holding the letter. She looked at my face, and then at the envelope on the table, and understood immediately. She sat down across from me and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet," I said. "Are you going to write back?" I folded the letter along its original crease and set it on the table. "He'll have to wait," I said. Forgiveness isn't something I can hand over on request. It's not a document you file and receive in return. It's something that has to be earned, and earning it takes time, and the time hasn't passed yet. I looked at the letter. He has years to think. That's actually a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one. Sarah said quietly, "Do you think he means it?" I considered that carefully, the way I had learned to consider things over the past year without rushing toward an answer, without filling the silence with something easier than the truth. "I think he means it right now," I said. I think he's in a place where meaning it is the only thing available to him. Whether he'll still mean it in 5 years, when he's out, and the world is asking things of him again that I don't know. That's the part that has to be earned. She nodded. She picked up her mug. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. I had started writing in October. Not a memoir, I disliked the word, with its implication that the story was finished. More of a record. I wrote about the diagnosis, about the months before Marcus left, about the specific sequence of decisions I had made and why. I wrote about what it felt like to be a teacher for 31 years and to understand, finally, that the most important lesson I had ever tried to teach was the one I had delivered without words, in a courtroom, through a stack of documents that had taken 8 months to assemble. Patricia had agreed to read the drafts. She had strong opinions about clarity and precision, which I respected. She had returned the first 50 pages with 17 margin notes, all of them useful. I was not writing it for publication, necessarily. I was writing it because there were other people, older people, people in declining health, people whose children had begun to look at them the way Marcus had looked at me, who might benefit from knowing that preparation was possible, that silence was not the same as helplessness, that the law, when invoked correctly and early enough, was a more powerful instrument than most people understood until they needed it. I wanted them to know that you could love your child and still protect yourself from your child, that those two things were not contradictions, that the most honest expression of love, sometimes, was refusing to pretend that what was happening was not happening. I wrote slowly, in the mornings, at the kitchen table, with the window in front of me, and the medication on the counter where it belonged. Some days I wrote 3 pages. Some days I wrote 3 sentences. I was not in a hurry. I had learned, over the past year, that hurrying was a form of fear, and that fear was the thing Marcus had been counting on. By March, the birch tree in the front yard had fully committed to spring. The buds I had watched in February had opened into small, pale green leaves that moved in the wind off the river. I had started taking short walks in the morning, not far, just to the end of the block and back on the days when my body permitted it. Dr. Osei had encouraged this. She said that movement, even modest movement, was a form of information the body needed. I believed her. On one of those March mornings, a Saturday, Sarah arrived early. She had brought pastries from a bakery on Alberta Street that she claimed were the best in Portland and that I had been skeptical of until the first time I tried them, after which I stopped being skeptical. She put them on the table, poured herself tea from the kettle I had already prepared, and then said, "It's a good morning. Come outside." We sat on the front steps. The sun was coming up over the rooftops to the east, the light still low and slightly orange, the kind of light that made everything look briefly like a painting of itself. I had my coffee. Sarah had her tea and a pastry she was eating with the focused attention she brought to most things. The street was quiet. Somewhere in the neighbor's yard, a bird I could not identify was making a sound that was both insistent and completely indifferent to us. I said, "I'm still here." Sarah looked over at me. She had that expression again, the one where she was deciding whether to say something. This time she said it. "Yes, you are." "I wasn't sure I would be," I said. "When Marcus left in June, I wasn't sure I would be here in March." She didn't say anything to that. She didn't need to. She had been there in June, and she knew what June had looked like. "That's the only thing I'm certain of right now," I said, "that I'm still here, that the medication is working, that the house is mine, that Patricia's book is going to need at least 3 more rounds of edits." I drank my coffee. It was hot, the way I liked it. Everything else, Marcus, forgiveness. What comes next, I can hold all of that loosely, but being here is not something I take lightly. Sarah said, "You shouldn't." I don't. The bird in the neighbor's yard kept going. The light moved slightly as the sun cleared the last rooftop and became something warmer and more direct. Sarah finished her pastry and dusted her hands together and looked at the street with the same quiet attention she brought to everything. I'd come to understand, over the past several months, That Sarah Okonkwo was the kind of person who was completely present wherever she was not performing presence, not managing it, simply inhabiting it. I had known very few people like that in my life. My wife, Eleanor, had been one. My best friend from graduate school, a man named Terrence who had died of a heart attack at 53, had been another. Sarah was the third. She said, "You know what I told my daughter after I told her the whole story?" "What?" I told her that the bravest thing I'd ever seen wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the recordings or the documents or any of that. She looked at me. It was the fact that you never stopped taking care of yourself. Even when someone was trying to convince you that you weren't worth caring for, you kept calling Dr. Osei. You kept your notes. You kept believing that you had the right to still be here. I held my coffee cup with both hands. The warmth of it was specific and solid. "You were not alone," she said, "even when you thought you were." I nodded. I did not say anything for a while. The bird had gone quiet. The street was beginning to wake up. A car started somewhere. A door opened and closed. Someone's dog began a brief and unconvinced bark before stopping. I thought about the letter on the kitchen table, folded along its crease. I thought about the book on my laptop, 53 pages and growing. I thought about Dr. Osei's careful words stabilized and how much weight a single word could carry when it was the right one. I thought about Marcus at 19, sitting in my classroom before I knew him as my son, asking a question about something I couldn't remember what with the particular seriousness of a young man who believed that understanding things was important. I had thought then this one pays attention. I had been right. He had paid attention to the wrong things. In the end. But the capacity had been real. Somewhere in a cell in Salem. I hoped he was paying attention again. I finished my coffee. The cup was empty and still warm. "You're right," I said. I was not alone. Sarah picked up her tea. We sat there for a while longer, in the particular quiet of a Portland morning in early spring, while the light settled into something ordinary and the street became itself again, and the day began. If you've ever sat with someone in that kind of quiet, the kind that comes after everything has already been decided, after the worst is behind you and the ordinary world is just beginning to reassemble itself, you already understand what it means to still be here and to know that someone stayed. I went inside. Marcus's letter was still on the kitchen table, folded along its original crease. I picked it up, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, the one where I kept the utility bills and the spare key and things that needed to be kept but not looked at every day, and placed it inside. I closed the drawer. Then I went to the back porch, picked up the watering can I had left by the door in February, and walked out to the birch tree.